The city was restless that night. Neon lights buzzed faintly. The air smelled of rain on concrete, and the sidewalks were littered with forgotten traces of the day. Fast food wrappers, crushed soda cans, the faint echo of hurried footsteps. It was in this restless silence that a man stood, leaning quietly against the brick wall of a closed convenience store. His name was James Walker. His clothes were worn, the soles of his boots frayed, and his beard uneven from weeks without a razor. To passers-by, he was just another homeless man, someone invisible, someone irrelevant. But James held himself differently. His shoulders, though draped in a ragged coat, were straight. His hands, though calloused, never fidgeted nervously. He clutched a small, battered duffel bag close to his chest, as if it were the last piece of himself worth protecting. From the end of the street, flashing red and blue lights cut through the night. A patrol car pulled up, tires screeching slightly on the wet pavement. Out stepped Officer Daniels, tall, broad, and with a perpetual scowl that suggested the world was nothing but trouble. Two younger officers trailed behind him. "Here we go," Daniels muttered, eyeing James with disdain. Another vagrant disturbing the peace. The rookie beside him hesitated. "Sir, he doesn't seem—" "Quiet, Lopez," Daniels snapped. "This one's mine." He strode up to James, his boots clapping against the pavement. James looked up slowly, his eyes calm, almost tired. "Evening, officer," he said softly. Daniels sneered. "Evening? Don't get smart with me. What are you doing here? Trying to break in? Waiting to rob someone?" James shook his head. "Just resting. It's been a long day." That answer, simple as it was, only fueled Daniel's irritation. "Resting? You think the sidewalk's a motel? You bums are all the same, lazy, looking for handouts, leeching off people who actually work." The word stung, but James didn't flinch. He kept his eyes steady, refusing to give Daniels the satisfaction of anger. A small crowd began to gather, a few bystanders curious about the flashing lights. They whispered, some shaking their heads in pity, others smirking at the scene unfolding. Daniel stepped closer, his voice rising for the crowd to hear. "Listen here, old man. Men like you are what's wrong with the city. No job, no home, no future. You don't belong here." James opened his mouth, calm as ever. "Officer, I mean no trouble. I've walked far today. I just need a moment to rest." But Daniels cut him off sharply. "Save it. You're nothing but a burden to society. And tonight, you're going to spend it behind bars where you belong." The crowd chuckled uncomfortably. A woman pulled out her phone to record. The opposing officers shifted awkwardly, but none dared challenge Daniel's authority. James lowered his gaze for the first time. His lips pressed together in silence, but his eyes, deep weathered eyes, betrayed the sting of humiliation. "Turn around," Daniels barked. James hesitated, clutching his duffel bag closer. "Please, this is all I have." Daniels ripped the bag from his arms and tossed it aside carelessly. A faint metallic clink echoed as it hit the ground. James froze for a split second, but before he could react, Daniels yanked his hands back and snapped cold steel cuffs around his wrists. "You see this, folks?" Daniels announced proudly to the onlookers. "This is how we clean up the streets, one worthless vagrant at a time." The rookie, Lopez, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the duffel bag now lying open at the seam. For just a moment, he thought he saw something glinting, not trash, not scraps, but something polished, deliberate. But before he could lean closer, Daniel shoved James toward the patrol car. As James was forced into the back seat, his face pressed briefly against the cold glass window. For the first time, his expression faltered. Not anger, not fear, something deeper. Something that hinted at battles long past. On the ground, the duffel bag lay abandoned. Through the torn fabric, the corner of a shining military medal peeked out, catching the glow of the streetlight. No one noticed. Not yet. But soon, the truth would unravel. And when it did, the same man mocked as worthless would become the one figure no one could ignore. The precinct buzzed with the usual noise of late-night arrests. Ringing phones, clacking keyboards, muffled chatter from holding cells. But when Officer Daniels marched James Walker to the front doors, the room seemed to still for just a moment. A man in tattered clothes, wrists cuffed, head bowed. To most of the officers in the room, he was just another homeless drifter. Another name to process. Another file to forget. Daniels pushed him forward with unnecessary force, a smirk plastered on his face. Got ourselves a prize tonight. Daniels bragged loudly. Caught this one loitering. Maybe casing a store. Another worthless vagrant off the streets. Several officers chuckled. A few shook their heads with indifference. But one pair of eyes, belonging to Sergeant Miller, an older officer with salt and pepper hair, lingered on James a little longer. At the front desk, the clerk began typing in details, glancing at James only briefly. "Name?" she asked mechanically. Daniel scoffed. "Good luck getting a straight answer. These bums usually give you 3 different ones." But James spoke clearly, his voice steady. "James Walker." The clerk paused, typing the name. Date of birth. James gave it. She hit enter. The system processed the entry, then stopped. A red notification blinked on her screen. "Strange," she murmured, frowning at the monitor. "What's strange?" Daniel snapped. The clerk hesitated. "It says the name matches a decorated military veteran. Service record, multiple commendations, even a Silver Star." The room grew quiet. Daniel's laugh, breaking the silence. "Oh, come on. Him? A war hero? The system must be glitching. Look at him. He's a bum with a duffel bag, not some soldier." But Sergeant Miller stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "What's his service number?" The clerk clicked through the file. "It matches. Army records. Tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. This man is Sergeant First Class James Walker, honorably discharged, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Silver Star for valor." Gasps rippled through the room. Younger officers glanced at each other, whispering. Daniel's smirk faltered for the first time. This can't be right." Miller turned to James, studying him closely now. "Sir, is this true?" James lifted his head slowly, his eyes weary but unwavering. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's true." Before anyone could speak, the rookie Lopez, the only one who'd shown hesitation earlier, hurried in with James' duffel bag. He'd retrieved it from the patrol car. Sergeant, you should see this," Lopez said nervously. He placed the bag on the counter and gently pulled back the torn seam. Out slid a small velvet case. Lopez opened it carefully. Inside gleamed a medal, the Silver Star, catching the fluorescent light of the precinct like a shard of history itself. The room fell silent again. No laughter, no chuckling, just stunned silence. Miller's voice dropped, filled with respect. "This isn't a glitch. It's him." Daniels flushed red. What's a so-called war hero doing sleeping on the streets then? Probably drank his life away, wasted it all. "You can't fool me." But his words sounded weak now, hollow. No one laughed with him this time. James remained calm, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "I didn't ask to be arrested. I didn't ask to be dragged through the streets in handcuffs. I've been through battles most people couldn't imagine. Losing a home, losing family, those were harder than anything I faced overseas." His words hung heavy in the air. Several officers looked away, ashamed. Even Lopez's eyes glistened. Sergeant Miller straightened. He stepped forward and, with deliberate care, removed the cuffs from James' wrists. The metallic click echoed like a final verdict. "Sergeant Walker," Miller said respectfully, "on behalf of this department, I apologize. You should never have been treated this way." James rubbed his wrists, not with anger, but with quiet dignity. He nodded. "Thank you. But respect doesn't erase what was said tonight." His gaze flicked briefly to Daniels. The arrogant officer shifted uncomfortably, suddenly finding the floor far more interesting than James' eyes. The tension in the room was thick. What had begun as a moment of humiliation was now a stunning revelation. The so-called vagrant was no criminal, no burden. He was a decorated war hero. But the questions remained. How had a man who once wore medals of valor ended up sleeping on sidewalks? What tragedy had pushed him from the battlefield to the shadows of the streets? The precinct buzzed once more, But this time it wasn't with laughter or mockery. It was with curiosity, with unease, and with the sense that the truth about James Walker was only beginning to unfold. And as James picked up his duffel bag, the metal glinting faintly under the harsh lights, one thing was certain. Everyone in that room would remember this night. The precinct had fallen quiet. The hum of printers, the clack of keyboards, the murmur of officers. It all seemed distant now. Every eye lingered on James Walker as he stood near the front desk, his weather hands resting lightly on the duffel bag that carried what little remained of his life. For years, the uniform he once wore had commanded respect. Tonight, his ragged clothes had earned him nothing but ridicule, until his truth broke through. Sergeant Miller, still standing nearby, leaned forward slightly. "If you don't mind me asking, Sergeant Walker, how did you end up here, on the streets?" James let out a slow breath, his eyes fixed on the scratched linoleum floor. "It's not a story I tell often," he said, "but maybe it's time someone listened." His voice softened, almost as if he were slipping back into memory. "I enlisted at 19, James began, straight out of high school. I didn't have much waiting for me at home, so the Army became my family. I served 3 tours. Iraq first, then Afghanistan. I saw things, did things that never leave you." His eyes clouded, though his tone remained steady. "We lost brothers out there. Good men, but we fought for each other. And in the middle of all the chaos, I found a sense of purpose I'd never known. When I was awarded the Silver Star, it wasn't for me. It was for the men who never made it back." A hush settled deeper over the room. Even Daniels, who had mocked him mercilessly, stood frozen, his arrogance stripped away by the raw weight of James' words. James' voice grew heavier. "When I came back home, that's when the real battle started. The world had moved on without me. My parents were gone. My marriage." His voice cracked briefly, then steadied. "My wife couldn't handle the man I'd become. The nightmares, the silence. She took our daughter and left. I don't blame her. I wasn't easy to live with." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "The Army had given me purpose, but once the uniform came off, I didn't know who I was anymore. Employers looked at me like I was broken. I tried construction jobs, security jobs, but when the panic attacks hit, when the noise reminded me of gunfire, it was all over. I'd freeze, and no one wanted to keep a man like that around." A few officers shifted uncomfortably. The harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct suddenly seemed cruel against the vulnerability in his voice. James tightened his grip on the duffel bag. Bills piled up. The little savings I had disappeared fast. I lost the apartment. Slept in my truck until that got repossessed. After that, the streets. He gave a bitter smile, one that held no joy. "People walk past you when you're homeless. They don't see a man. They see a problem. A nuisance. A ghost." His eyes swept the room briefly, locking on Daniel for just a moment. Tonight wasn't the first time I was insulted, but it was the first time I was handcuffed for simply existing. The shame on Daniel's face was plain now. He looked away, unable to meet James' eyes. Sergeant Miller cleared his throat, voice thick with emotion. "You gave everything for this country, and this is how it repaid you?" James shook his head slowly. "I don't want pity. I made my choices. I'd do it all again for the men who stood beside me. But the truth is, when soldiers come home, some of us don't really make it back. We're still fighting battles no one else can see." Silence followed his words. Heavy, reverent silence. Lopez, the rookie, finally spoke up. "Sir, you shouldn't be out there on the streets. There are programs, resources. Maybe we can connect you with someone who can help." James gave him a small, grateful nod. "Maybe. I've been turned away before, but maybe this time will be different." Miller placed a hand on James' shoulder. "It will. I'll make sure of it. A man like you deserves better than this." For the first time that night, James' expression softened, a flicker of hope breaking through the weight of despair. The room remained still, every officer silently processing what they had just heard. The homeless man who had shuffled into their station in handcuffs was no criminal, no vagrant. They were standing in the presence of a hero who had carried invisible wounds far heavier than any chains they could place on him. And as James lifted the small velvet case, brushing a finger over the silver star inside, he whispered almost to himself, "Maybe my story's not over yet." The officers around him exchanged quiet glances, each one deeply changed by what they had witnessed. The man they had nearly written off as nothing had reminded them, and perhaps even himself, that dignity and honor don't disappear with circumstance. They live on, even in the darkest corners of the city streets.